That two-dimensional matrix that we were just discussing, of deeply personal to universal issue on one axis, and from local to international governments on the other axis, it applies to another big theme during the past 99 episodes and here at number 100. That is how governments, specifically national and international ones, they never let a good crisis go to waste when it offers opportunity to grow government staffing, budget, and control. And sometimes government will even manufacture a crisis or two if no convenient, legitimate one exists at the time to do what? To further the same objective. So let's connect to that and use three big examples of the dynamic at work. All three, you'll see, ended at the same spot on our matrix where policy was set to take freedom from the individual and put it in the hands of government, and where the level of government that ended up with the most control was national or international at the expense of local government say-so. Now, the first is what happened with COVID, a pandemic that, wouldn't you know it, looks more and more as if it was hatched in a Wuhan lab. But anyway, the global pandemic hits, and what do governments proceed to do all over the world? Well, they take pandemic and they layer on top of it pandemic policies, as in shutdowns of work, and the private sector, and government services, and healthcare, and retail, and schools, and my favorite, playgrounds, which proceeds to make just about everything worse. Business balance sheets weaken, student proficiency falls off a cliff, health woes worsen across the board from diabetes to substance abuse to cancer prevention. People get used to being paid not to work. The old lose contact with everyone close to them and become depressed. Everybody lost, except for government. Government was the big winner in the pandemic policy game board. It told you the job you have is non-essential. It stopped your kids from shooting hoops at the court down the street. It said you're not allowed to visit friends down the street or across the country. It said if you don't get a shot, you're not going to a restaurant or a play. It wrecked everyone's finances with the inability to open up the business or to go to work, and then made everyone dependent on government assistance. Government came out of pandemic bigger and worse than ever, by design, because of pandemic policies. The second example is what's going on with banking and the finance sector. The global financial crisis, or GFC, of 2008 to 2009 was catalyzed by government and central bank monetary policies that created moral hazard and incentivized banks and financial institutions to take on excessive risk. The banks and financial sector hit a wall, and a clear crisis emerged. And then instead of survival of the fittest and consequences of risk-taking that you would see in a capitalistic economy and under free enterprise, what did we see in lieu of that? Yes, heavy-handed government intervention through policies such as Dodd-Frank, along with a host of other measures in the U.S., including bailouts. And most notably, there was the Fed's free monetary policies, or free money monetary policies, that was able to get by us under cover of the GFC's crisis. And guess what? After the global financial crisis came and went, the Fed and federal government, they found a way to keep those existential threat, emergency free money monetary policies in place for over a decade. Dodd-Frank, the various and sundry regulations and measures beyond Dodd-Frank, and the Fed's permanent emergency free money zero interest rate policy cumulatively distorted the capital markets. It punished savers. It picked winners and losers of industries. It pumped up asset bubbles for the 1%. And it moved the stock and bond markets more than the underlying performance and metrics of individual companies did. And we saw this all across the globe, whereby the financial sector and capital markets of the United States and the EU and the UK, they look more and more like the controlled economies and markets of places like China than what they once were. And once again, like with pandemic policies, everybody lost. And the losing, by the way, is just beginning, because we haven't even begun to fathom the extent of this bill that is coming due. Silicon Valley Bank is only the start. Credit Suisse is just the tip of the iceberg. Inflation hasn't even warmed up yet in terms of level and duration. But wait, there is one entity that won in this financial mess created under cover of putting the fire of the global financial crisis out. That's right, it was government. No one in this country can borrow money. Nobody can withdraw money from their account, hire a financial advisor, buy an asset. No one can sell an asset without getting some form of approval from government. The third and final example I'll proffer up is perhaps the penultimate opportunity for national and international government to gain permanent control over the local and the individual. and that is climate change and the need for government to tackle climate change for the benefit of humanity. Climate, it's always changing, and lo and behold, it's doing so today. Human activity increases the trace levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, no doubt. And then here comes government lecturing us of the need to take climate change and morph it into climate change policies. Now, you know the catchphrase by now. Say it with me: tackling climate change. So what happened? Trillions of dollars, yes, trillions, in taxpayer resources thrown in an unimaginable mosaic of programs and schemes and sectors and mousetraps, coupled with a heavy-handed coercive grip on government regulation and bureaucratic fiat over arenas such as domestic energy and pipelines and power plants. And for 2 years on this podcast, we warned time and time again of where this was all going. It wasn't about atmospheric CO2 levels or global warming or code red. It was about control of the individual. Now what are we seeing? Gas stove bans, combustion engine car bans, natural gas hookup bans, gas station bans, plastic bag bans, gas lawnmower and leaf blower bans. And they're coming for washing machines, the size of your house, the type of furnace that you have, and so much more. Within the next year, I predict you will see governments or international pseudo-government entities like the UN calling for the taxing or banning of certain foods. Beef for sure, perhaps beer and seafood. And why? The official argument is going to be they have large carbon footprints in their supply chain, which, by the way, is true. But the real reason is the administrative state wants to dictate what you do, where you live, and what you eat. And it wants to dictate how many kids you have, which is why it's only a matter of time before these entities start penalizing families that have kids. Heck, they already brainwashed many young people that having a family and children is equivalent to original sin against Mother Earth. Everyone is getting and will continue to get crushed by climate change policies. That includes small businesses, the middle class, families, farmers, working poor, flyover country, and coastal America, even if coastal America refuses to admit it. How's it going, New York City and California, when it comes to your demographics and your quality of life and your future prospects? The next generation is getting bamboozled the worst. They lose individual freedom and opportunity, and at the same time, they're going to get stuck with the tab for the trillions of dollars this orgy of spending will create, which is ironic, considering how the most gullible true believers of tackling climate change and the code red crowd these days are going to be the ones that are the most sort of cheated. But there is one stakeholder that wins in all this code red theater. Yes, that is government, and particularly big government and these international pseudo-government entities like the United Nations and the IMF and the World Health Organization. They love climate change policies and the tackling that goes with it, because there's never been a bigger and more effective scheme in history to match its audacity and payoff opportunity, except for maybe one genius concept from the past, the Catholic Church and original sin. Yes, the idea that you're born in sin and need to make up for it your entire life by doing what? Paying up to the church and doing what the church tells you because they have the hotline to God. That was epically genius. But climate change policies, they may end up doing one better than when it was all said and done.